If you've ever been defending the faith from a Muslim or Unitarian or really anyone who doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, then you've most likely been brought to this passage, John 17, verse 3, where Jesus says, "And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God." So the argument goes as follows. In John 17:3, Jesus is speaking to the Father, and he says this, "And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent." And what's going to happen is they're going to take this verse, and they're going to twist the words, and they're going to tell you that, hey, well, don't you see here? Jesus is saying that only the Father is the true God. So if Jesus is saying that only the Father is the true God, then how can Jesus also be God if it's only the Father? And what they'll do is they'll take this one verse completely out of context, isolate it by itself, and change the wording on it. But when you really break down this chapter, you go to the context, read what it says, how it says it, it completely dismantles itself just a couple verses before and after. But let's start with verse 1. So in verse 1, Jesus spoke these things, and lifting up his eyes to heaven, he said, "Father, the hour has come." So right here, I want to stop for a second and showcase that this is Jesus. He's not preaching to a crowd, right? So Jesus is not speaking this to a crowd. He is speaking directly to the Father. And you see with the Father and the Son and the different persons of the Trinity, you see an inter-worship of each other, right? So Jesus speaking in this kind of language to the Father is no surprise. It's normal. Actually, if you go to Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12, it says here, "You, Lord," and this is the Father speaking to the Son. So the Father speaking to the Son, he says, "You, Lord, in the beginning founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain, and they all wear out like a garment, like a mantle, you will roll them up. Like a garment they will also be changed, but you are the same, and your years will not come to an end." So you even see in Hebrews 1 that the Father is like an inter-worship of the Son, and same for the Son to the Father. They glorify them themselves. Right? Within the persons of the Trinity, you see an inter-worship of each other and an inter-glorification of each other. And that's not an issue, right? That's not a problem because it's what you would expect. So Jesus speaking this language in John 17 is not abnormal. It's not strange, right? You would expect to see it. So now that we've established that the language is not abnormal and that the persons of the Trinity can do this within themselves, let's get to the actual substance of what is being said. So once again, the argument is that in verse 3, Jesus is supposedly saying that only the Father is true God. And so therefore, Jesus can't be God because only the Father is. However, this is a problem. So let's just take a look at an example. So on the screen, I've put an example sentence, right? So on the bottom, when it says, "They may know you, the only true God," this is what the verse actually says. Right above it, I've put 2 plus 2 only equals 4. Why is this significant and why does this parallel? Because look at what the word only is modifying. So in the top sentence, you have 2 plus 2 only equals 4. So right now you see that only equals 4. What is being modified is equals 4. So with this, can 1 plus 3 also equal 4 with that statement? Yes, it can. Because saying that 2 plus 2 only equals 4 doesn't negate any other equation that also equals 4. The only thing it's saying is that when you have 2 plus 2, that will only ever equal 4. 2 plus 2 can never equal 5. It can never equal 1. It can never equal 7. So 2 plus 2 will only ever equal 4. That's all it's modifying. In the same way, you see that when it says that they may know you, the only true God, what's being modified is true God. The Father can never be a false God. The Father will only ever be true God. This isn't by itself a negation that Jesus can also be true God. Because as long as Jesus isn't a false God, he can fall into that same category that he's giving to the Father. The only difference is Jesus is speaking to the Father in John 17. The way people try to bring it is right here on the bottom. So now on the screen, we have only 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is what you're saying when you repeat it back or when people bring the argument and say that, well, Jesus is saying that only the Father is true God. See, that's not what Jesus is saying. That's how the argument gets portrayed, but that's not what the verse says. So if I were to say only 2 plus 2 equals 4, well, now you have a problem. Because if you say only 2 plus 2 equals 4, you cannot have any other equation to also equal 4. So that means 1 plus 3 can't equal 4. So that would be a false statement. And so if Jesus would have said, only you are the true God, well, what is that modifying? It's modifying you. It's saying only the Father, only you are true God. Then you would have an issue. And so this is something you really have to be cognitive of, because when people bring John 17:3 and try to use it against the divinity of Christ, it's always going to be misinterpreting how this actually reads, how the grammar of this actually follows. So it's not, in this sense, it's not saying only the Father. Never. This verse is not modifying the Father. It's modifying true God. This is something you have to be aware of and you have to catch, because if you concede that if you concede what they're bringing, the premise that Jesus is saying only the Father, well, then it all falls apart. Okay, so now we've established a couple things. One, we've established that in the verses 1 through 3, the language that Jesus is speaking unto the Father is not abnormal language. It's language we see consistently. We even see the Father speaking of the Son with this same language that Jesus is offering to the Father. So we don't have an issue with that. We've also established that in verse 3, that statement, even in isolation, is not a negation of Jesus' divinity, right? So Jesus can still be divine with the statement he makes in verse 3. Now, here's where you get to the detrimental part. When you get to verses 4 and 5, you completely wreck their argument at its very foundation. You cannot come to verse 3 to show that Jesus is not divine, because if you say and claim that Jesus is not divine, as soon as you go to verse 5, you have to admit that Jesus is committing blasphemy. So if anyone ever takes you to John 17:3, as soon as you establish that verse 3 in isolation is not a negation of his divinity, go to verse 5, and it completely dismantles this entire argument and notion from its very core. So let's go to it. Verse 4, I glorified you on the earth, having finished the work which you have given me to do. Now, Father, glorify me together with yourself, with the glory which I had with you before the world was. Now, these are the two important sentences where Jesus tells the Father in verse 5, glorify me together with yourself. Why is this significant? Because Jesus isn't saying, give me a different glory, give me a lesser glory. No, he's saying together with yourself, right? The same glory, Father, that you have, I want that glory. That's the glory Jesus is getting, the same glory that the Father has. So not only does he claim that he's going to get it, he claims that glory is the same glory which he had before the world was. So before the world was created, Jesus had the same glory as the Father prior to the world being created. Why is it so? Okay, Jesus has the same glory as the Father. Why is that important? Because to a first century Jew, they would have known Isaiah. They would have known Isaiah 42, which says, I am Yahweh, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. So hold on, Yahweh, because you just said that you won't give your glory to anyone else. So no creature, no being, nobody gets the glory of Yahweh except for Yahweh himself. So either Jesus is committing blasphemy, because Jesus is claiming to be Yahweh. If you were asking for the glory of the Father, and you're saying that Jesus is a being, he's a created being, that he's a created creature, right? He's not God. So if a created creature is asking for the glory that only God can possess, that only Yahweh can possess, Jesus is making a claim that he is Yahweh in verse 5. Because he's asking for the glory that God doesn't share with anybody else. So either Jesus is Yahweh, he's ignorant, or he's committing blasphemy. These are the only three options you can have. Now, no one who presents this argument would say that he's ignorant. So you get left with a very challenging conclusion. You have to conclude that Jesus is committing blasphemy or that Jesus actually is Yahweh. Because in order to ask for the same glory that the Father has, the same glory that Yahweh has, you have to be Yahweh also, because you can't receive the glory otherwise. So this entire argument falls apart as soon as you take them to the context, as soon as you fix the twisted grammar, and as soon as you take them 2 verses later. You throw a wrecking ball through the entire foundation of the argument from the very beginning. Well, guys, this is Bryson here with Glory Apologetics. Thank you all for watching. Comment if there's any other arguments you want me to specifically make a video on, and I will try to go to that one. But I appreciate everybody watching. I hope you all have a blessed rest of your week, and thank you so much for tuning in. Peace.